Now let us continue to build our understanding of this model of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And the next piece of puzzle that we now want to understand is the reasons why the short-run aggregate supply curve of a country may increase and therefore shift to the right, or decrease and therefore shift to the left. Now, from amongst many different possible reasons or causes of these shifts in the short-run aggregate supply, the most frequent reason, something that happens most frequently, are the changes in the cost of production. This can happen if there is an increase in the global prices of oil or petrol, because oil and petrol, it's an input into most of the production processes. So if petrol becomes more expensive, the costs of production for most of the firms increase. Similarly, you can think about an increase in electricity tariffs in your country, the rates of electricity. Electricity again is something that is required in all the production processes. So if electricity becomes more expensive, the whole cost of production goes up. And similarly, wages. Remember, wages, I said, is the biggest proportion of the total cost of production for most of the firms. So when wages, when they change and when they finally adjust and become unstuck, then also the cost of production of the firms will change. Now let's assume that the cost of production increases. What it means for your short-run aggregate supply curve is that now if you pick up any price such as PL2, now the business's profitability will go down, because whatever profits they were earning at this price level PL2, now if the price stays at PL2 but cost of production increases, that is where we say the business will become less profitable, and therefore whatever output the firms together were producing previously, now they will produce less than that. And that same logic applies to any other price level such as PL1. Whatever was being produced previously, now the cost of production has increased. At the same price level, profitability will be less, and therefore less will be produced. So the whole aggregate supply curve, we say, will shift to the left. Now you can also think about the other case where the cost of production, let's say, decreases. Maybe the government comes in and gives a subsidy. Maybe there is an improvement in infrastructure in the country, better roads, better telecommunications, better internet, because of which the cost of production of firms go down. Now, if firms' cost of production go down, then at each of these different price levels, the business will become more profitable, and the whole short-run aggregate supply curve, we say, would increase or shift to the right. Now, I said these changes in cost of production. They are sort of the most frequent reason why usually a country's short-run aggregate supply curve would fluctuate and increase or decrease. But in addition to changes in cost of production, there are some other, you can say, more serious reasons, more serious in the sense that there are some other factors that when they change, they shift the country's short-run aggregate supply curve, as well as changing the country's potential output. So that is where I'm saying you can think of them as more serious. Now don't forget cost of production. As I said, it is the most frequent reason why short-run aggregate supply curve changes or shifts. So don't sort of think that since this is only shifting the SRAS, whereas these other factors that we are going to look at will shift the SRAS, the short-run aggregate supply, as well as the potential output. That does not make this any less important. Now with that, let me explain what are those things that change the country's potential output and shift the country's short-run aggregate supply as well. Now these are those factors that change the country's productive capacity. Now when we talk about changes in country's productive capacity, remember our discussion in the AS micro course of this PPC, the production possibilities curve. The production possibility curve, we remember, also said that shows the productive capacity of the country. Now you can think here about this potential output that we have marked out here on this ADAS diagram as well, and which we have defined as the maximum sustainable amount of output that a country can produce. You can now start thinking of this potential output as one of the points on the PPC. Because on PPC, we said that in this theoretical model, all these points on a PPC reflect a maximum possible output. So from now onwards, think of this PPC, points on PPC, as points reflecting potential GDP or potential output. And therefore, this potential GDP that we talk about in the model of ADAS, think of it as one of these points. Now, that will be helpful in more than one ways as we go along. But first of all, this is helpful because when we say that factors that shift both the short-run aggregate supply curve as well as the potential output are those factors that change the country's productive capacity, then we are talking about the same things that we learned when we talked about the reasons why the country's PPC may shift outwards. There, remember, we learned that the productive capacity of a country is dependent upon the quantity and quality of the four resources: land, labor, capital, and enterprise. And if either the quantity or the quality of any of these four resources that a country possesses increases, we learned that the country's productive capacity will increase, its PPC will shift outwards. Now we can apply the same thinking that, look, this potential GDP, this potential output, the maximum sustainable level of output a country can produce, it is a point on the PPC. And how will or when will this potential output increase? Well, because of the same reasons. When either of your four resources of land, labor, capital, enterprise, when its quantity or quality increases, your potential output will increase. And whenever your potential output or potential GDP increases, the short-run aggregate supply curve increases and shifts to the right along with it. Now, I don't want you to go into the details of, why the short-run aggregate supply curve will also change and shift to the right when potential output increases, but just keep it simple. And just think in terms of an extreme example. Just imagine that your country, wherever you belong from, just imagine that overnight, through some magic, you wake up in the morning and you find out that the amount of land as well as labor and capital and enterprise, that is the number of people as well as the machines and all the other resources in your country, has increased by 10 times. Just an imaginary thing. Now, if every resource has increased by 10 times, then even in the short run, yes, it's easy to see that whatever the price level, some more output will be produced. Your country, after all, has so many more resources. And therefore, just use the simple logic to remember this link. These four resources, their quantity and quality, when it changes, increases or decreases, the country's productive capacity increases or decreases. And as far as our ADAS model is concerned, our potential output will change with changes in this productive capacity, and our short-run aggregate supply curve will also change. Now, once you understand this basic logic, let me give you some of the common reasons how the quantity of these resources may change, and some common reasons why the quality of these resources may change and therefore shift the SRAS as well as the country's potential output. Now, as far as land is concerned, you see the quantity of land. Land means all the natural resources. So the country can just get lucky. Maybe it discover minerals or oil or other resources, or maybe the country comes up with new technology through which it can discover and then extract minerals. That is how natural resources, the resource of land, may increase, and therefore the quantity of your resources will increase, the potential output, and therefore the short-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the right. Now, as far as labor is concerned, there are many ways in which the quantity of labor can increase, but I want to mention here three that you will commonly see in the MCQs. First of all, remember immigration, and here we are talking about net inward immigration into a country, which would mean that more people enter your country than leave. And what that simply means is that the amount of labor in your country will increase. That will increase your productive capacity, shift your SRAS to the right, and your potential GDP will also increase. And immigration is something that many countries, actually many developed countries, they try to encourage immigration. They try to encourage immigration precisely for this reason. They want more of this resource of labor in their countries. Now, something that many developing countries try to do to increase the amount of labor force they have is that they try to encourage females to work more. That is, they try to increase the country's female labor force participation rate. Because in developing countries, most of the females, they don't formally work, they are not part of the labor force. So if you can somehow encourage women to start joining the labor force, if you can encourage more women to start working, then the amount of labor will increase, and again, potential GDP, the PPC, as well as the short-run aggregate supply curve, it will shift to the right. And then you can think about the changing incentives to work. Now, to understand this, you have to think about developed countries like Scandinavian countries or the UK, where the country's governments, they give healthy amount of unemployment benefits, cash handouts to people who are unemployed. And so much so that in some of these countries, these unemployment benefits are so handsome, they're so handsome that many people, they sort of, slack off, thinking that instead of working from 9 to 5 and maybe earning 50 euros a week, the government, for doing nothing as an unemployment benefit, the government maybe is giving them 40 euros instead of 50 a week that they can earn by working very hard. So the greater the unemployment benefit, the lesser the incentive to work, and therefore fewer the people who will join the labor force. So your quantity of labor will decrease, potential GDP will decrease, and short-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the left if the amount of unemployment benefits are so high that they take away the incentive to work for many people. Now, capital, that depends on investment. So the government can spend on increasing the amount of capital, the tools, machinery, equipments, the infrastructures, the roads, the bridges. The private sector can also do that. And as far as entrepreneurs are concerned, many governments try to encourage more people to become entrepreneurs. And one common way in which they try to achieve that is by offering cheap loans to new businesses, to startups, so as to encourage entrepreneurs to jump in and start new businesses. And some governments, commonly, they also give tax incentives to new businesses. Maybe first 3 years they tell the entrepreneurs that you won't be charged any tax in the first 3 years if you set up a new business. So all of these different things, as I said, I've just moved through these quickly. Remember the basic concept. Through these different things, the quantity of these resources increase or decrease, and that in turn shifts your PPC, your potential GDP, as well as your entire short-run aggregate supply curve. Now, as far as the quality of resources is concerned, you see, when the quality of resources improve, then that in turn means that your resources become more productive. Their productivity increases. Now, productivity formally is defined as the amount of output that a resource can produce in any given period of time. So the easiest way to understand productivity is to think about a worker, a laborer. If somebody is working in a pen making factory, and if he makes 10 pens an hour, then 10 is his productivity per hour. Now, improvements in quality of resources mean that your labor, in this case, instead of producing 10 pencils or pens per hour, if he starts producing 15 pencils or pens per hour, then we say that his productivity has increased and his quality has improved. Now, how can you improve the quality of your resources? Well, the three main things that you need to remember, of course there are more, but the three main things that you need to remember are education, training, and health. Because if your workforce is more educated, and if it is more trained, then it will be more skilled, it will be better at its job, it will be better at learning new things, and overall it will be more productive. And similarly, if your workforce is healthy, both physically and mentally. Again, a worker who is healthy will be more productive. He will be able to give you better quality of output and a larger amount of output, and he would, let's say, take fewer sick leaves, and that would together mean that you lose fewer number of hours every year because of health issues, and overall the productivity of resources, the amount of goods they can produce in a given amount of year, that will increase. And ultimately that would mean, with better quality of resources, your productive capacity, therefore your PPC, will shift to the right, country's potential GDP will increase, and the country's entire short-run aggregate supply curve will increase, and it will shift to the right. Now again, these are some of the things that you will commonly see in your MCQs. Now it's not just the quantity and quality of these resources. Do remember that even if something as simple as, I shouldn't say simple, this is something very important, if the mobility of your resources increase or improve, even then your potential GDP, your PPC, productive capacity, and your short-run aggregate supply curve, they will all move to the right, they will shift to the right. Now what do we mean by mobility of resources? Again, think about labor, the workers. You see, if in your country the road networks improve, public transport improves, air travel and the amount of flights that increases and improves, then this is where we say that your workers, your labor in the country, it will become more geographically mobile. It will be able to move from one place to another depending on where the demand for labor is, where production needs to be done. They will be able to reach even the small cities and villages, the greater the mobility of these workers. And overall, that would mean that as a country, you would end up producing more output. So potential GDP will increase, and the short-run aggregate supply curve, we assume, will also shift to the right if the geographical mobility of your workforce increases. Now, in addition to geographical mobility, even occupational mobility, meaning that if your workers are really very skilled and they can move in between any different sectors and any different jobs as the economic conditions and the state of technology changes, even then you will say that, look, because of this better mobility, because of improved mobility, your resources will end up giving you more output. So the potential GDP, the PPC, they will increase, shift to the right, as well as the short-run aggregate supply curve. And lastly, remember, we say that even broad changes in technology will also sort of improve what you can get out of these resources. Now, by technology, remember, we don't mean here IT and things like computers and all of these IT-related things. What we mean here by changes in technology are some broad level changes in how a country or an economy carries out the process of production. Now, by broad changes in the processes of production, what we mean is something like the just-in-time methods of production introduced by the Japanese in the 1970s, I guess, which meant that instead of stocking up on your inputs and raw materials, you had this just-in-time technique where every day the raw materials would be delivered, and that would improve the efficiency and the output that you could get out of your resources and reduce the costs of doing business. So those are the sort of broad level changes in how you carry out the process of production that we say are reflections of changes in technology. And when technology improves, and usually it does improve, it doesn't deteriorate, you don't go back. So when technology improves, when you have new processes of production, better methods of production, then again, your PPC and productive capacity will increase, shift to the right, your potential GDP will increase, and your entire short-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the right. Now with that, let me just summarize what you need to remember out of this particular video as far as the short-run aggregate supply curve is concerned, because I have said a lot of many things over here which are important in their own right. But overall, remember, we just need to memorize the reasons why the short-run aggregate supply curve may shift. Most important reason, the most frequent, I should say, reason is changes in cost of production. If cost of production falls, the short-run aggregate supply increases, shifts to the right, and vice versa. On the other hand, these broad, bigger, more serious reasons where your quantity or quality of resources increase or decrease, that will shift not only your short-run aggregate supply curve, but your potential output as well as your PPC to the right.